EP, and we started talking, and we had many common interests in Rotary and outside Rotary. Like, he has worked extensively with Indian IT companies, and that is an area of my profession also. So we had a lot to talk, and over a period of time, we have had several calls. If I say that we have understood each other's passions more better than after the first meeting. And while talking to him over a Teams call, I requested him if he can be a speaker for our Roti meeting, and he gladly accepted to be our speaker, in spite of this being close to midnight, where he is, that is in Australia. And he did not hesitate even a minute, and he said, "It's okay. I am happy to join you at midnight also." So, Glenn, it's all yours. We are eagerly awaiting to hear your presentation.
Okay, well, if the technology allows me, I'll share a screen with you. Hopefully you are able to see my screen.
Yep.
Yes.
And with a bit of luck, that's gone into presentation mode.
It has, yes.
Okay, so over the last year or so, I've done a number of presentations to Rotary clubs, and find it very interesting. Being a Rotarian myself, I'm currently the president-elect for the Rotary Club of Sydney. I'm also the chair of our Service and Awards Committee. It keeps me pretty busy. Also keep my hand in on the technology front. But most of my time is actually spent working with an organization called the Institute for Economics and Peace. And IEP, for short, is a strategic partner to Rotary International, and I'll talk a little bit about that a little later. Just wondering how many of you are members of a Rotary Club that is also a peace building club. Are there anybody on the call who's a member of a peace building club?
Yes, I am.
VJ. Was that VJ?
Our club, our
Yeah.
club is the first peace building club in District 9800.
Ah, okay, great. So there's a couple on this. That's fantastic news. Well, we'll talk a little bit about the work that we do directly with Rotary, but maybe if I can start off by just giving an introduction of IEP and what it's about. And even before that, in this presentation, I'll present a little bit of information about IEP, talk about the reports that we produce and are used by governments, development agencies, a lot of organizations around the world to help inform policy and strategy. Talk about some of the key findings in these reports. So these reports cover our Global Peace Index, Positive Peace Reports, Ecological Threat Report, and others. We'll touch on some of the trends that we've seen in peace over the last 18 years that we've been doing this research. We'll touch on the economic value of peace, and there's some numbers in here which are quite staggering. Ukraine, of course, is very topical, so I don't think we can have a conversation on peace without a few words on Ukraine. One of the things that we are now seeing, and we produce reports on this, is the ecological threat to peace, and we'll unpack some of that in this presentation. And then we'll talk about positive peace. It's always good to have something positive to say, and we'll talk about what's actually required to create a peaceful environment, to create peaceful communities where humans can actually flourish in the absence of conflict and violence. And then if anybody's interested in exploring a little bit further about what we can do as individuals and as clubs or in our districts, what we can actually do as Rotarians to further the cause of peace, then we can offer a few actions there. And of course, Rotarians are people of action, so it's always good to finish up off on some positive actions that can be taken. So a little bit about IEP. IEP, the Institute for Economics and Peace. We're independent, we're not-for-profit, and we're a think tank. And we're dedicated to doing research into developing a much better understanding of what are the key drivers for peace, as well as what are the economic benefits that peacefulness can deliver. Our benchmark report, as I mentioned before, which is used globally by governments, other think tanks, research institutes, and so on, is the Global Peace Index, and we'll talk about some of the recent findings from that report. We are a small organisation based here in the suburb of Sydney in New South Wales, Australia, but we have offices around the world. We measure the impressions that we make in social media. We know that we have 152 countries listening in to what we publish, reading what we publish. We register around 40 billion media impressions every year. This is all sorts of media, newspaper articles, books, whatever, where references are made to IEP and our research. In social media alone, it's around 1.4 billion impressions every year as well. So the numbers are quite large. We produce 10 separate reports, and we're going to touch on a few of those today. And overall, as I mentioned before, reports used by governments are used by the OECD, the Commonwealth Secretariat, World Bank, United Nations, and many other organizations that I won't bother to try and list here. So, as I said, a small organization, 40 staff in 5 regions, and we have 6 offices. The one here in Sydney, as I mentioned, is our head office. We also have offices in New York, Mexico City, Brussels, The Hague, and Harare in Uganda, Zimbabwe as well. And whilst we work on these reports, we also operationalize those reports or the insights that we derive from them to create a number of educational products, which include our Peace Academy, Ambassadors Program, and workshops that we run. And we'll talk about those a little bit more shortly. So for our Global Peace Index, it'd be good just to enlighten the audience with a few of the key findings out of this year's report, which we've launched in several geographies, and most recently we did a launch in the House of Lords in the UK, which is very gratifying. It helps to raise the profile of the reports that we produce. And by the way, these reports that I will touch upon, they're all available free to download on our website, Vision of Humanity. It's an easy one to remember, visionofhumanity.org. And as I said, all of the research reports are free to download. So our 2023 Global Peace Index, which is obviously at a point of time a snapshot of the global state of peace, showed that there have been general improvements in 84 countries in the levels of peacefulness across many different data sets that are measured. Unfortunately, there were 79 countries where we also saw peacefulness deteriorate as well. Overall, the change was a small deterioration in peacefulness. And that small change is measured at 0.42%, which doesn't sound a great deal, but as it's the 13th time that we've seen this in the last 15 years, we can see that overall the global peace is deteriorating over time. Any improvements that we saw, those countries who did see improvement, is because there were less cases of terrorism. The political terror scale had reduced, and in many of those cases, military expenditure had decreased also. That's in those countries that we could see were more peaceful. Where there was deterioration is because there were more external conflicts being fought. You think of Russia, Ukraine, obviously being one example of that. Political instability and deaths from internal conflict. It's remarkable when we look at the 162 countries that are measured. And of those 162 countries, we rank them from the most peaceful to the least peaceful. Iceland has been the most peaceful country for quite a number of years now. Maybe it has to do with the fact they don't really have many close neighbours. That might be something to do with it. Denmark has improved over last year. Ireland slipped back one space. New Zealand fourth, Austria bringing up the five. So we can see there's certainly there's a pattern that emerges in Scandinavian countries that usually represented it quite well. Would anybody like to hazard a guess at who might be the least peaceful country in the latest report?
My guess would be either Ukraine or Russia, but I as a U.S. citizen, I'm pretty well guaranteeing you that U.S. is going to be in there somewhere with all the political nonsense.
Yeah, so US
I
is.
believe
Sorry, I missed that one.
I believe Afghanistan is the least.
I think somebody has been reading the reports. Absolutely. So I'll just go back to my
Wow.
screen here, and here are these countries. So you're right, Afghanistan is sitting there in 163rd place. By the way, we know there's over 190 countries in the world. We actually only report 163. The countries that are missing are those where there is insufficient data, or the quality of the data is such that we really cannot take an objective reading of that. That would include, for example, most of the Pacific Island nations, from Fiji, Vanuatu, Kiribati, and the like. But the report does represent well over 97% of the world's population, so it is relevant. Ukraine and Russia were mentioned. Of course, we can see those in the bottom 10 here, and Ukraine has slipped significantly in terms of its ranking. 14 places that it's fallen. Russia has fallen 2 places. It was a relatively less peaceful country for the last few years, which is no surprise, I think, to anybody. So what are the trends that we're seeing over the last 15 years? Well, we know, as I mentioned before, that year on year, for 13 of the last 15 years, peacefulness has declined. 2013, 2014 is where we saw improvements in peace, but then either side of that, peacefulness has declined. What we're seeing in terms of trends in internal and external conflict. So those internal conflicts, whether it's something like what we're seeing in Sudan today, which has come into the news again just recently. The intensity of internal conflicts has increased significantly and has continued to rise steadily over the last 15 years. And of course, we're also seeing that there are more external conflicts between countries than at any other time since we started taking these measurements. I mentioned before that, as the name Institute of for Economics and Peace would suggest, that we look at the economic value of peace. The cost to the world economy is 17.5 trillion US dollars a year, which is by anybody's measure a significant amount. If we were to put that in terms of how much it's costing each and every individual on the planet, it's $2,200 per person. You come from a country that's fairly well off and salaries are high, that might not sound a lot, but that is well above the average family income for many countries that are in this measurement. It is a significant figure. And when we look at that, and when we talk to organizations, enterprises, governments, we try and put that in terms that they will understand. And if by the work that we do and organizations like Rotary do can achieve a decrease in violence across the world of 10%, it's a $1.75 trillion saving, which could then be directed into education, into health, into many other worthwhile causes. So it really does detract from being able to create a much better environment for ourselves in the world. And where's that money? Where the money that's spent on security, on militarization, and so on. When we look at the breakdown of that, we see that military expenditure accounts for something like 43.6%. Internal security is around 30%, and then we see the breakdown by specific types of violence in the community, whether that's suicide, homicide, violent crime, and so on. So for the 10 most affected countries, those where the biggest hit on GDP, the loss is 34% of GDP, which is pretty scary, really. Mentioned Ukraine, we can't really have this conversation without having a look at what impact that is having. Recent estimates, this is as of towards the end of 2022, was that some 83,000 people were killed in the conflict. That's conservative. Other estimates would suggest it's well over 120,000. Projections suggest that 65% of Ukrainian men between the ages of 9 to 24 have either fled the country or have been killed. It's very difficult to get the information as to exactly what's happened to them. But there are a very significant number which are unaccounted for. And as we can see from the map, the distribution of those deaths is down the eastern side of the country, where, of course, in areas like Donetsk, we know that's where most of the conflict is taking place. So the economic impact of this violence to the Ukraine is $449 billion. It's a massive increase compared to the prior years, which is no surprise. And that is equivalent to about 63% of total GDP. So however this war ends, it's going to take a very long time and a lot of international support to help Ukraine back to the economic well-being that it enjoyed before conflict. I remember a few years ago, I was working for a company based out of Copenhagen, Denmark, who provided software solutions for the investment management industry. They had a large team in the Ukraine, actuarials. Ukraine actually has a very, very good university system, or had, with a very high number of actuaries coming, very highly skilled actuaries coming out of that, which this company tapped into. So we can see other impacts then that war has, and not just the direct impact that we can measure in dollar terms, but this ongoing impact where human capital, human talent has been significantly impacted, and that affects all of us. As well, of course, we hear about things like the grain embargo that's been put in place, which is creating further problems in the world when it comes to food shortages. So the impact goes beyond the Ukraine, but this is what we've been able to measure to date. We touched a little bit before about internal and external conflict. And on this slide, we see that if we look at that another way, we look at intrastate conflict. That has overall, over the years we've been measuring, has declined slightly. There have been peaks and troughs there. But internationalized intrastate conflict has increased significantly. And that's where foreign entities get involved in the intrastate conflict. And we've seen a significant increase of that since around 2007, 2008, and certainly an acceleration around the 2014, 2015 timeframe. So before I start on ecology, I just wondered if there's any questions around what I've been presenting in terms of global peace and our global peace index. I do have a copy of the report here because I can't memorize it all. And if anybody's interested, I know we have people on the phone, on the call, sorry, from various countries, and I can call out that somebody mentioned the USA earlier, and the USA, I think, are sitting in around, I think, 80th place out of 163. India is sitting at 126 at this time. And as I mentioned, I should mention the country I'm currently living in, which is Australia, and we are sitting at around 122. We've slipped backwards because of increased military expenditure, nuclear submarines obviously coming online, so that will probably mean that we will slip even further in coming years.
How about the UK?
The UK, let me have a look. I did see the UK in here. Oh yeah, UK are sitting at 37 at this time.
Okay, not bad.
Not bad. Could be better, but yes, not bad. And they've slipped back one place. Oh, sorry. United States of America is 131 out of 163.
Oh, United States is lower than India.
Oh yes.
Oh.
On this on this scale.
That's something to brag about.
Yeah, well, maybe not so surprising when you consider the military expenditure, but other factors come to play, and it's a factor that, for example, we struggle with in Australia. It's incarceration rates. We have very high incarceration rates for our First Nations people, unacceptably high. But other countries, and USA as one, has very high incarceration rates across segments of society, and that certainly contributes towards the ranking. So there's quite a number of factors that come into this. So yeah, so if there's no questions on the global peace, I'll move on to global ecology piece, where we've been producing on an annual basis now the ecological threat report. Again, copies of that are available on that website, absolutely free to download and use. And perhaps we'll start off with just a bit of a map here. Those areas in green, the darker green, are where the ETR score is very low, which is good, through to where it's extremely high. And we can see, particularly around sub-Saharan Africa, that a large swathe of that that geographic region is really suffering, feeling the impact of climate change.
So before you joined, Glenn, we were just chatting about, and our chair David was sharing that his region, St. Louis, is going through an unusually high temperature heat waves.
Yep.
So,
well, yes, I think the discussion around climate change has changed now. It's not a question of what can we do to avoid it, or do we even believe that it's happening. It's here now, and yes, and we just need to work very hard to try and limit its impact and hopefully reverse it. In Australia, we're very concerned. We see the fires, the forest fires in Canada, Greece, the heat waves across huge swathes of North America and Europe. And of course, we've had a long history in Australia of bushfires and issues related around that. And I think we're probably looking forward to a very, very challenging year. So yes, it's scary to think of what lies ahead of us. But the first thing we need to be able to do is understand what impact that is going to have on our society as a whole, so that we can then start to take appropriate measures to build up resilience in our communities. So ecological threats certainly, definitely has an impact on peacefulness and is a driver of conflict. Sub-Saharan, as we mentioned, Sub-Saharan Africa, all bar one of the countries are already facing severe water stress. 89% of all the people are facing food insecurity, that are facing food insecurity are in Sub-Saharan Africa region. At the same time, the population is projected to increase by 95% by 2050, and in some of those countries, it will more than double. Of the 5 megacities worldwide with the largest population growth, 5 of the megacities, 5 of those are in Sub-Saharan Africa. 6 of the 10 least peaceful countries are in the same region, and 2 out of 3 hotspot countries are also in that region. So no surprise then that when we look at the risk of ecological threat, 7 of 8 countries of the worst risk scores are in that region also. That's not to say that other regions of the world are not going to be impacted, but this is where we're going to see the most significant impacts. So 41 countries now face extreme food insecurity. That's going to impact around 830 million people in those countries. It's also a classification of catastrophic food insecurity, which is 14 times higher than in the surrounding region, Middle East and Northern Africa. We know that 92% of food insecure people will now live in low peace countries, and we can see the correlation between the two. We know which countries are experiencing the worst deterioration. And whilst over the early part of the 2000s, well, actually going back to I guess 2005, back to there, we could see that there was a improvement in terms of the number of people who were undernourished. But then since 2017, we've seen that start to increase significantly. And we look at 2019, 2021, almost getting to a vertical line there, but certainly the increase is quite significant. And unfortunately, that's only going to get worse. So we are facing a disaster across many areas of the world. Water and food, of course, related. Lack of water absolutely leads to a lack of food. And we can see, and I won't read each one of these out, but we can see that not just in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, Latin America, which are all suffering, which are worst areas for water stress. We can see that now a number of European countries will also start suffering water stress to a much greater degree, including Greece, Italy, Portugal, and the Netherlands. Conflict with water as a trigger has now tripled since 2000. So if we look at 3 countries in particular, Iraq, Somalia, and Yemen, we can see that they have had the most water-related conflicts in the last 20 years. Damming also is a major issue for downstream countries. We think of the Mekong here in Asia. Think of all those people that are dependent on the Nile. So as countries become more desperate to tap into water and to secure water, then other countries are going to suffer from that, and of course that's going to be a trigger for violence. So didn't really want to paint too bleak a picture. There are things that we do, and certainly Institute of Economics and Peace is very strong in terms of being able to use the data that we derive from the research that we do and get insights from that, as I mentioned before, are then used to inform policy and strategy for the large organizations, development aid organizations, governments, enterprises, and so on. So at least decisions can be made based on the actual data itself. And one of the things that we measure is what we call positive peace. So these are the factors in our society that help to build and predict and sustain peace. So there is good news, there is positive news here. So first of all, what is positive peace? What we've been talking about in terms of the Global Peace Index is really measuring the degree of peacefulness in terms of the absence of violence in those countries, in those regions. Absence of violence or the fear of violence. That's negative peace. It's the absence of something that we are measuring. Whereas positive peace is all about the attitudes, the institutions, and the structures that are in place that help create and sustain peaceful societies. So I would liken that to one's health. I could be very fit today, not have a weight problem and anything else. But if I don't eat well, if I don't do some exercise, if I don't look after myself, then my health is going to deteriorate. And I think that's pretty obvious. This is the same thing. I might be relatively peaceful today, but if I haven't got the right attitudes, institutions, structures in place, then the likelihood is that I'm going to be a less peaceful society tomorrow. And our research over the last 18 years has proven that to be the case. The positive peace report we produce has proven to be a very accurate predictive tool of a country's peacefulness into the future. So 15 years, I think I said 18 just now, 15 years we've been doing this research, 163 countries as I mentioned before. I'll just skip these, just talking about how do this work with international experts and so on. Just come to this. There are something like 36,000 data sets that are used, collected from a wide variety of sources. So these are all aggregated up into around 6 measures of ongoing domestic and international conflict. They're aggregated up into 10 measures of societal safety and security. And that includes things like number of refugees, number of internally displaced persons, impact of terrorism, homicide, incarceration rates, and so on. And finally, 7 measures of militarization. So military expenditure, number of armed service personnel, ease of access to small weapons, which is not just for the military, of course, that's in the society itself, which I suggest is probably another reason why the US ranks fairly low. So a perfect state would have no police jails or crime. We're hardly likely to see that. But what we actually want to do is make small incremental steps to make sure that environments, it's the societal environments of attitudes, of institutions, of systems is optimized to make sure that we can improve peacefulness going into the future. So how do we measure this? Well, this brings us to what we call the 8 pillars of positive peace. And these 8 pillars have been empirically derived from our research over the years. And we split it out into these 8 pillars of well-functioning government. And that can be government at the country level, the federal level, at state level, council, local councils. It could be the governance of your local sports club, governance of your local Rotary club. So when we talk about well-functioning government, it's a government at all layers of society. Equitable distribution of resources, and more we're seeing that the distribution of food, water, and so on is becoming more of an issue. Free flow of information, good relationship with neighbors, high levels of human capital. Education systems are in place to make sure that we have a well upskilled population. Acceptance of the rights of others, whether that's diversity, equity, inclusion programs, whether it's looking at refugees from particular ethnic minorities and accept their rights to be able to practice within the rules of the country their own beliefs systems. Low levels of corruption, and I'm not sure, Girish, if you remember, there was a gentleman at the Rotary International Conference in Melbourne that suggests that should be renamed to say no room for corruption. And I actually agree with that. I think that's probably a better name for that pillar. And a sound business environment. And what we've seen from our research is all 8 of these need to be in place for a peaceful environment and to create that optimal environment so that humans can reach their full potential. And what we see when we measure this in countries, that the higher level of positive peace correspond with higher per capita income. We see greater resilience in the community, so when there are natural disasters, floods, hurricanes, whatever, they are more likely to be able to bounce back from that. Better environmental outcomes, higher measures of well-being, and better performance on the UN development goals as well. So we can see that where there is high levels of positive peace, we also see high levels in these other areas as well. And then there's the economic side of this. We can see that since 2010, those countries where they have a high positive peace ranking have outperformed all the other countries in terms of growth in real GDP. And that's by an average of 33%, which is quite significant. And we also see there's a very close correlation between the social progress imperative, the SBI Foundation's well-being scores, and the positive peace index scores, where the better the positive peace score, we see that that corresponds to a improved or higher well-being score from the social progress imperative. So again, we can see the correlation there, which again proves the hypothesis that we are seeing from the data. And as you mentioned before, environmental scores also are much improved in those countries and regions where they have a higher positive peace ranking or score. And we can see in the blue that those countries, and this is using the Yale Environmental Performance Index. You can see that there's very close correlation between high scores on that index and our positive peace scores as well. So the evidence is certainly there that having good institutions in place, strong institutions, having the right attitudes, having strong, good systems in place will actually create a much better environment for a country, for communities, for society generally to achieve better outcomes. So that's the snapshot of IEP. There are other reports that we produce, including Business and Peace, which is an interesting one. We actually produce a report on Mexico, the Mexico Peace Index. We don't usually do it at country level, but we do it with Mexico because we've been we've been doing it for the government there for quite a number of years now, because we've been able to run a number of programs down there, which have been very successful, and they certainly are using our peace reports to help measure the effectiveness of programs that they're put in place, and obviously inform policy in doing so. So if there's any questions on the reports that I briefly touched on here, please go ahead. Otherwise, I'll talk now about the work that Rotary and IEP does together.
Right, we are a little behind schedule, so
Okay, I'll go through this as quickly as possible then. Okay, so Rotary IEP have a partnership in place. We recognize we share a lot of the same values and the same views on peace. It's a 7-year. We're in our 7th year of the partnership. We're on our 3rd MOU now. We have a Rotary Positive Peace Academy that's been completed by 4,000 Rotarians to date. And we also have what's called a Rotary Positive Peace Activator program that's been run in North America, Latin America, Europe, Asia, and East Africa, with well over 200 Rotarians being inducted into that program. And we also have an IEP ambassadors program with over 3,000 ambassadors across 106 countries. So there's a lot of work that's going on between Rotary International and IEP. We run our workshops globally with Rotary clubs and districts and so on. We do a lot of presentations and communications and so on. And of course, we attend Rotary events. And we're talking about the International Convention just recently, where IEP had a booth there. I'll quickly touch on some examples of a Rotary Positive Peace workshop. So we go in to a Rotary club, a district, a group, community groups, and we run a Positive Peace workshop, which teaches the participants about the concepts of positive peace and the 8 pillars of positive peace, and how to use that as a lens to look at the community, the issues and the challenges in the community, and being able then to identify a project to help address a number of those issues. So in this case, following a Rotary Positive Peace workshop with IEP facilitating it, the Rotaract Club, not actually a Rotary Club in this case, identified a problem in the local school. The objective was to improve student conditions, enrollment rates, and academic performance that took place between 2016 and 2018. The problem was that before implementation, there was a low attendance rate. After implementation of the project, that increased by, for boys, 182%, and for girls, 123%. So significant improvement in attendance rate. Before the project, only 30% of students were getting grades of 1 or 2, the highest grades. That improved to over 60% after the project for grades 1 and 2. So you can see it made a direct impact on attendance and academic performance. And what they did was they looked at their community, particularly around the school, through those lenses, the lens of those 8 pillars. And for well-functioning government, they made sure they included local community leaders on the planning and the implementation committee. sound business environment. They made sure that they involved local tradespeople for the construction of new classroom blocks and other works that were undertaken. Equitable distribution of resources. They made sure that they were providing scholastic material to all students, no exception. One of the issues with the girls was that they were, of course, not attending school during their menstrual cycles, embarrassment, cultural issues. So provision of sanitary pads, free sanitary pads, was included in the program, and that made a big difference. And the local farmers were pretty annoyed with the students before the program took place, because the students were raiding their farms, stealing food because they were going to school hungry. So fruit trees and porridge lunches provided, and that to certainly help relationships with the local farmers. And they partnered with the local radio station to get the information out as to what was happening and to encourage kids to get back into school. And also in terms of not just education, but in terms of health as well, they initiated a medical check program also. And in terms of corruption, or whenever there's building works going on, things would go missing traditionally. So they set up a process where they could actually brand all items that were being donated and make sure that they were being managed and monitored. So a very successful project. I did a presentation to Rotary Club of Wyndham Harbour here in Australia a little while back, and I went through some of the projects that they had been involved in to see how they would map to the 8 pillars. And no surprise, they were mapping to a number of pillars, but there were some they weren't mapping to. So the suggestion to them, and maybe it's the same to some of the clubs represented here, is that if you look at the projects that you're working on, have worked upon, or planning to work upon through the lens of these 8 pillars, are there other things you could do to get even better outcomes? And the consensus at the Rotary Club Wyndham was, well, yes, we could have got improved or better outcomes if we had used this methodology. So what happens next? Well, if anybody on this call, as an individual or for their clubs, are interested in following up on any of these activities that are available, you can join the Rotary Positive Peace Academy. That's an online program which teaches you the concepts of positive peace and how to deploy them in the community. That's online. Again, it's a free course to take. The other thing you can do is join, this is the next level up, the Ambassador Program. And this is where people are really interested in taking an active role in the community to develop peace building programs around community cohesion, resilience, and so on. And then, of course, there's the Positive Peace Activator Program, which is the Rotary version of the Ambassador Program. And you can go to the website. I'll provide the links separately to this to register your expressions of interest if you would like. So these are things that the individual can do. For the Rotary clubs represented here and all your districts, we can actually organize a positive peace workshop for you, which typically is over 2 days, where we go through a number of exercises, activities, and learnings that enables groups like Rotary clubs to be able to use our positive peace framework to identify issues and challenges and opportunities in their community, design projects around those, and actually make a real impact. So there's a summary of those activities, of how you can get involved. Sorry to have overrun a bit, but I hope that's been of use to you, of interest. I will stop sharing now. I can see people on the screen again. It doesn't look like anybody's fallen asleep, so that's a good omen.
That was fantastic, Glenn. It gave immense insight into the peace work, which forms an important part of the ecosystem of Rotary. And Rotary, International Rotary Foundation, they spend humongous amount of money on the peace program. So this actually brings peace down to the grassroots level, to the ordinary Rotarians, and how they can bring they can bring about lasting change in their communities and make world more peaceful and better place to live for everyone.
Absolutely. And yeah, often I think people look at the whole peace building process and think, well, what can I do as an individual? Well, it's small steps, and our program gives people the tools needed to be able to make those small steps. Might be small steps, but they can make huge impacts. I'm currently running a program with a youth club here in Australia, Indigenous kids, First Nations kids, and we can already see improvements in their attendance rates at school, behavior, and so on. So when you get involved in these programs, it's very, very important.
So Glenn, again, thank you for this. You kind of opened my eyes a little bit to, I mean, we usually always concentrate on our area of the world, and therefore the whole world's just like we are, and obviously it's not. Interestingly enough, we had a speaker at our club last week who is working on peace building, but from a completely different way. And I don't think they ever thought about it like this, but it's an organization I'm sure people have heard of, Habitat for Humanity, where they're building homes, and for a couple hours a day, you can go down and swing a hammer and bring peace to the rest of the world. Well, to your part of it. It is amazing what we can get involved in that we don't realize is out there, because like you said, peace for the world is it's a daunting thing. Where do I, it's kind of like our basement. I got to clean the basement. Where the heck do I begin so I don't do anything? And a little step, like you said, makes a huge difference all the way around.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, the Habitat for Humanity, because you look at some social groups or some communities, local tradespeople may actually have a problem with volunteers coming in to help build houses and putting them out of business. And I think a lot of organizations now are looking to say, well, will you be prepared to donate some time, some effort in kind, but we'll also use you for supplies and whatever. So there's a balance to be achieved there. And again, when you look at it through those 8 pillars, that gives you the lens to make sure that it's in everybody's interest. It's a bit like our 4-way test. Is it in everybody's interest? And sometimes we don't ask that question.
It's fair to all concerned.
Have you had any contact with or worked with the Rotary, the Peace Advocacy Project, which Keith and Jean Best run in schools? Very, very similar. Part of the reason I'm asking is that they went over and launched it in Mexico some years ago, and you mentioned Mexico. And I see that actually, looking at their site, the first peace school flag has been awarded in Australia to a school in Brisbane. But they go into schools and teach conflict resolution to the kids there and give them the tools to pass that on to others. It sounds very complimentary.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of organizations out there where we either partner with or they lead a project, but we come in and provide complementary tools and methodologies to them. World Vision is one of our biggest partners worldwide for that kind of work. But here in Australia, for example, with the PCYC, which is the Police Citizens Youth Club I mentioned just now, working with First Nations kids, we go in and help them. They have a number of different programs for the kids, but we provide something a little bit different, and certainly something that's needed in their communities.
Anybody else have any other comments? Any questions? I will throw. I'll take whatever I want to call it. I can't think of the word I'm using. Is still my brain's not working yet this morning. I used to work I substitute taught pretty much full time in one school district in the St. Louis metro area, and it was considered one of the more upscale counties. It wasn't St. Louis County, which has all of those problems. This was another county. and I'm saying it that way satirically on purpose, but that's how a lot of people felt. The school district was at 71% free and reduced lunch. Now, for those that aren't in the US, that means 71% of the entire student population of the school district was at or below the poverty line. And when I heard that number, I mean, I knew another district I worked at, it was in a very poor area. They were 100%. I knew that. You know, you didn't think about it with this group. Then, as you were talking, Glenn, I did look up just in the US, and we consider ourselves to be affluent and so on, but 1 in every 6 children in the US are food insecure.
Right.
That is a huge number. I saw somebody post on Facebook that instead of buying, you know, the pay it forward and you're buying the coffee for the person in line behind you at Starbucks, call up to your local school and pay off the past due of a school child whose parents cannot afford to pay for their school lunches.
Yeah.
I mean, we can all afford a coffee or a tea or whatever. These are the little things, that some of the stuff that you brought up that we don't even think about doing, that goes a long way in supplying peace to somebody else. So thank you for just pointing it out to begin with. Thank you.
I think those are great examples there. And again, it's, you know, it's interesting when you look at those situations, you think, what are the ramifications of that? Because of course, kids going to school hungry, they're not going to learn well. You know, so now we're creating generational issues, or we're creating issues for society in the future. It's hungry kids is bad enough, but it's what's the impact of that going to be? So yeah, anything we can do to help.
Any other comments, any questions, concerns? I did put a note in the chat. Be on the lookout for the breadbasket that will be coming out shortly. We need you for these, folks. 1 or 2 of us can't find all the speakers. We need you. There'll be more on that later. Any last words, Glenn, before we close up for the day?
Well, I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time tonight, and for allowing me the pleasure of presenting to you. It's a big subject. Try to keep it short. Please go to visionofhumanity.org if you have interest in this. If you've got students in your household who are studying or the human rights, humanities, whatever area, to point them to the research work we do. They find it invaluable.
And Patrick, you had something. I see your hand up. I'm sorry, I missed that earlier.
Yeah, I'm just curious, Glenn, do you do the Positive Peace workshops virtually? We have an e-club. So, I mean, I live in Zambia. My e-club is based in Johannesburg. We have members in Canada, members in the United States, members in Europe. Do you do the Positive Peace workshop virtually?
Normally, we run them face-to-face because there are activities involved, but we can do virtual workshops, and we tailor them accordingly. So if there's something you're interested in, we can certainly have a conversation. And depending on the locality, we may well have office, or we may have ambassadors in the vicinity that can actually come in and run it. But in your particular situation, it's not a question of locality, because you're spread all over the world from what you're describing. So yes, short answer, yes, we can do a virtual workshop.
Okay, my email's in the chat box. If you send me a note, then we can communicate.
Will do. I just saw that pop up, but I just need to open up the chat here. And there it is. Okay. Yep, I've got it. Thank you. Thank you for that, Patrick. And I've just seen another.
Thanks,
I've just seen another email address come up there as well, so I'll make sure I capture all of these.
See, Glenn, be careful what you volunteer for. You might be taken up on it.
We are more than happy. Our main purpose is to spread the word, basically, and the more we can do that, the happier we are.
Very good.
Okay.
There's
And
one more.
And Glenn, when I put the information out, because obviously this was recorded, I'll put the link up on our Google groups that we
Webpage.
have. And I will put your email, if it's okay with you. I'll put Glenn's email up there so that if anybody wants to contact him direct, they can get you that way. Is that okay with you, Glenn?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
And just
Dave?
if anybody's interested in it now, I've just put the Vision of Humanity website up and my email address anyway. But yes, please share that. Now those other email addresses have disappeared off my screen. here.
David, I believe we have a Gmail YouTube account, and the password is with Abhishek. If we can get it, we can upload this recording on the YouTube also.
Okay.
Okay, fantastic.
The password is with Abhishek. We have a
Akhilesh.
Gmail account as well as a YouTube account of Roti.
Vijay bhai, you mean Akhilesh?
Akhilesh, sorry, sir. Maheshwari.
Maheshwari, yeah, our webmaster. And Glenn, thanks for pointing out that issue on our website. It is sorted now, so you
Also,
can.
it wasn't just me then. It wasn't dumb user syndrome.
Right.
Yeah, many people were not able to log in there. Yeah.
It's sorted now, and
Excellent.
please do register as a member of Roti.
Yeah, well, I'll be very interested in registering and maybe joining some future one. This time of night is pretty quiet here in Australia. Not much else is going on. So.
And no ashes also.
Well, that's what was keeping me up a little while ago. But I guess if we start talking cricket, we'll lose quite a few of us.
Yeah, the Americans, you will lose the Americans.
Originally I'm from the UK, but these days, because I've been out here in Australia so long,
So it's way past midnight for you.
I'm an Aussie. So it's
Okay.
great to meet you all.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you
so
very
I might look a little bit distracted. I'm just making sure I'm writing down these email addresses I'm seeing popping up. But if Yurish, I might just check in with you in the next day or two to make sure I've got everybody who's shared.
Sure. No worries. Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll let you go. We'll let you go and have some sleep. You have a
Yeah, it's
busy
way
day
past
tomorrow.
midnight.
and all of you enjoy the rest of your day. All the best.
Okay.
Y'all take care. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Glenn.
Take care.
Truly appreciate it.
Thank you.
And as far as the rest of the group, I'm gonna close it out too. Unless somebody wants to stay on for anything, I can leave it open for a little bit, but I do have some stuff I have to get done. Life gets in the way once in a while, so.
Yeah, I'm popping into another meeting. Zoom is wonderful, but everybody's on Zoom now.
You got it.
It was great seeing you all, and I look forward to seeing you again next month.
Yep. Take care. Thank you all.
Great to see everybody.